welcome back to my channel, where today I'd like to start with one of my new obsessions, a book of poetry by Anne-Marie Elizia called She's Magic and Midnight Lace. Because this Elizia chick is clearly really very cluster B. So, just slight show and tell when you were little. Torrential by Anne-Marie Elizia. Love my madness, my moodiness, and my full moons. Dance with my darkness, my demons, and their mistresses. Hum to my temper, my tantrums, and my torrential downpour. Whisper to my wanton desires, my wicked winds, and my wild roses, or leave me alone. And what better way to start a discussion about magical thinking and narcissistic abuse and madness and toxic relationships and trauma bonding. Yeah, it's not generally that fun a subject, but it seems like we really do need to be making these distinctions between abusive situations and trauma bonded situations, and the kind of therapy and help that both parties need in trauma bonded relationships. So let's start the journey at you first meet your partner in this trauma bond. And it's that intense attraction. That's what starts forming the trauma bond. Now, in a classically abusive relationship, this would be very manipulated by the perpetrator. But is this intense attraction, this feeling you found your perfect person, real? In trauma bonded relationships, yeah, it mentally is for both of you. You see, that's where the problem is. Yes, your cluster B, your mentally ill person, is delusional. You're also being delusional at the beginning. How do we know this? Because they move so fucking fast. Trauma bonded relationships move incredibly fast, because your cluster B, your high conflict personality, your bipolar, whatever it is, whatever the mental illness is, that is affecting the way they perceive the world, is leading to that same magical thinking, right? Everybody has it to an extent. You know, there's no scientific explanation for why we're attracted to the people we are attracted to. And it does get very interesting from there. Right, so with your deviations in cluster B relationships, you are pathologically different. You and your partner, whichever side you're on, whether you are the mental one or the sane one by society's standards, you're both really delusional. Chances are you both were feeling like it was love at first sight. And why? Alright, because cluster Bs, mentally ill people in general, we very rarely find that. We very rarely find that kind of romantic attraction. We'll have casual relationships, no problem making friends, but actually, like that feeling like, oh, I really love this person, I'm really attracted to this person, is really rare. And why? Sounded like a lispy rabbit. I do apologise. Anyway, we are chaotic by nature. We are delusional by nature, right? We know we're different, even if we don't have an awareness yet. we do. We feel outsiders. We know there's something not quite right about us. And people, the amount of people that can really accept that in relationships and even friendships is really low. So if you do attract a cluster B person, it's most likely because they feel accepted by you as well as you feeling admired by them. They are admiring you, and you're doing the same because we're ego driven. We come in with ego, which to neurotypicals becomes very irresistible. We're hedonistic. We encourage your worst qualities as well as your best. You know, we try and bring it up to a high. It works. You're also doing that because the hormones and the whatever the fuck in your brain, chemicals driving that sensation of falling in love are like drugs. Right, so when you first meet, that intense attraction, that is real. That is coming from both sides. It's how you're responding to it is the problem, because you are just throwing logic to the wind. You are being that cringy Disney princess who believes in love at first sight and soulmates. And I'm there with you in trauma bonding. It does feel like that at the beginning for both parties. Again, a really important factor between an abusive relationship and a trauma bonded relationship. Now the second stage, the big buzzword, love bombing. I'm not sure how many abusers actually put effort into that, but generally love bombing is very real for both parties, and you're both doing it, right? You've met each other. Oh wow, it's amazing. It's such a high. You're bringing each other up and just getting lost in hedonistic wonderland together. Right, that's perfectly normal on a longer time period once people actually get to know each other in neurotypical relationships. Your classic abusive relationship is not going to move this fast. It's not going to have this kind of crazy love bombing. And when we talk about love bombing, it's not going to be your pretty woman takes you in a private jet that Dr. Romani was talking about. It's probably going to be spending lots of time with you, lots of passion, intimacy, deep secrets, going out, having fun. You know, it's what people do when they're falling in love. And when mentally ill people fall in love, we take it further. And our partners take the lead from us. So our relationships move really fast. We're both love bombing each other and maintaining this high level of I've never had this much love and affection before. And then that's going to crash. It's going to crash badly. Now, before we move on to the addiction forming, in this stage, love bombing, the way it's going to crash, either someone's going to withdraw or someone's not going to stop. Right? So, how love bombing ends. One party stops it. It's not a joint decision. And it's pretty crucial to note that, because that's what leads to everything beyond this point. Right, this is the first huge difference. This is when your the chemicals in your brain, which are having all the good sensations, start to come down. Right, you're starting to come back to reality. It's 2 months into a relationship, you're engaged, you're living together, you're planning this whole future, you're having sex 8, 9, 10 times a day, and one partner starts dropping that, the other partner doesn't. It becomes overwhelming for one party. Now, the reason it's becoming overwhelming for one party is because the other party is disordered, or they're disordered, and the other party is neurotypical or has a conflicting disorder. It is a pathological misunderstanding, right? You don't understand why, from my perspective, as the cluster B, I don't understand why my partner suddenly seems to be pulling away, shutting down. I've not changed, right? Because I'm HPD and a grandiose narcissist. So I don't perceive there to be a problem with me, or an unusualness, like most people tend to calm things down after a kind of honeymoon period, right? No, we don't. We try and take it higher and higher and higher. And we've both been delusional, me and my partner on the more neurotypical or the conflicting mental illness side. And I'm still delusioned, and their delusion's starting to break down. They're starting to see incompatibilities. Behaviours that originally they found endearing, start to be concerning or upsetting to them. And one party is not understanding why the other party hasn't changed. They're not understanding why what they thought were quirks seem to be getting harder and harder to deal with. You are realising, whoever is realising it on whichever side it is, that holy shit, you've done something really crazy, and you and this person might not actually be compatible, but you're head over heels in love and you're justifying that, and it's starting to crumble and the mental cracks are starting to show on both sides. And then the addiction starts forming, right? Because this is the person you're crazy in love with, the person who knows you better than anyone, who feels like your soulmate, and yet there's so much wrong with them, and there's so much wrong in the relationship. It's all going downhill, but when it's good, it's the best ever. That's addiction. You are getting off on the highs and lows, and these are all conflicts, usually driven by your pathological differences in a trauma bonded relationship. Now, as a cluster B, I'm a high conflict individual, problematic person. I'm going to be hyper emotional. I need someone who can deal with conflict. Now, in the beginning of a relationship, when you're on a high, there is less conflict. People can see a bit of your conflict and think, oh, well, it's just that. When things start to go wrong, as we all know, stress sends everybody loopy. And there's stress on both sides. Now, this is normal in a normal, healthy relationship. Sometimes your partner is going to be an emotional punching bag. Sometimes you are. Barmies will happen. People get stressed. People need release. All of that is fine. There'll be small fights and bickering in relationships because you are talking about two different people in a shared environment. And it's healthy. It would be unhealthy if it was too much the other way, or a full-blown abuse situation. It's really hard to try and understand just how much pathological differences conflict. There is emotions that I do not have that you have. There is emotions and feelings and thought patterns that you're going to have that I cannot comprehend, and vice versa. It's going to start creating a hell of a lot of conflict. You're not going to understand my emotional reactions. I'm not going to understand your emotional reactions. It's going to end up in a kind of argumentative, fighty state. And again, you're both still holding on enough to this delusion of, oh, well, you know, we've had great love. We're perfect for each other, we're soulmates. It's just a rough patch. But you are both on a subconscious level at this point, realising it's not going to last. You two are just not right for each other. And you're also realising that this person that feels like your soulmate, whichever side you're on, is being broken mentally by just being with who you are on a pathological, emotional, spiritual, whatever level. And this is going to cause a lot of conflict. You're both going to handle conflict differently. And then, you know, the dramas, the conflict, the making up sex, the nice bits, the bad bits, it's all getting highs and lows and highs and lows, and you're addicted, and boom, we're into the rather blurred lines of abuse versus trauma bond. Right, we all know what different types of abuse are, right? Emotional, verbal, financial, sexual. Now, when these are done with the intent to harm, they are absolutely abusive. That is an abusive relationship. Now, in a trauma bonded relationship, both parties are engaging in and receiving these abusive behaviours, but they are emotionally reactionary. And neither party is really understanding what's going on in the other party's head. As an example, my ex-fiance was bipolar. We were in a trauma bonded relationship. I got fantastic counselling through Women's Aid. I do advise you to get help if you are in a trauma bonded situation. But back to my situation, he was bipolar, he would withdraw. I didn't understand that. I couldn't understand that. And when I asked him, it would be, he'd make excuses. Basically, I fell in love with who he was in mania because his crazy matched my crazy, and I couldn't separate real from fantasy. But that would really upset me, because for me, as a histrionic, grandiose narcissist, I can't stand silent treatment. I can't stand emotional withdrawal. I can't stand my partner's sex drive going down, because the fun part of being histrionic is the nymphomania. It's actually in the criteria. And the term histrionic comes from hysteria. So I suppose, you know, if you've done your studying of the history of psychiatry and sex toys, you can thank us for your rampant rabbits. You're welcome. And from there, abuse, it's reactionary. You're not understanding that what you're doing is an abusive behaviour, right? It's like shouting horrible things at someone. Right, that's abuse. But what if that person's really upset and you're shouting horrible things back at them, and it's going both ways? Then it stops being abuse and it starts becoming a trauma bonded relationship, especially as you each are seeing yourselves as the victim. Because there is so many pathological misunderstandings, you're just not doing it at all. It is, you are not gelling. no matter how much you communicate, they can't handle your emotions, you can't handle theirs, they don't understand it. You know, cluster Bs will tend to push boundaries the same as normal neurotypical people do, but our boundaries tend to be a bit more out there. And the reason we're doing it isn't to be horrible people, it's because we genuinely don't know what your boundaries are. And we will ask you, and we will see if that's right. And you kind of do the same to us. You know, you tell us, right, well, I don't want you to do such and such a thing. And it's like, well, that's illogical. Why? It's because my feelings. So yes, neurotypicals do the testing and the pushing boundaries as well. And then from that blurred lines area, which it really is in a trauma bonded relationship, which is why you both need help and you both need to understand your part in it to break the cycle for future periods. Now then comes the fun subject of gaslighting. But is it gaslighting if you really are crazy? Right, gaslighting is making someone feel like either they are going crazy or it could actually be one of you or both of you are crazy. And in a trauma bonded relationship, that is the case from the beginning. Because a trauma bonded relationship, obviously accepting like Stockholm syndrome and big crime things, like a general trauma bonded relationship requires one person to have a serious mental illness on a pathological level, because that's what creates all the difference. You are both gaslighting each other in a trauma bonded relationship because you're both delusional in how much you love each other, you're both addicted to each other, you're both trying to cling on to the good memories, you're both getting lost in your own magical thoughts, like both of you are ignoring the big problems and you're just two very, very, very different people who don't understand each other on a fundamental level. And both of you genuinely do think either that you're going crazy or your partner's going crazy, and both of those is right. Now, in a classic abusive relationship, the abuse is just going one way. You're not both ending up on the fucking psych ward. In a trauma bonded relationship, yeah, it could go that way. Because you and your partner have very different pathologies that just don't connect. So you don't understand what your partner's doing or what they're getting upset about or what the problem is. And neither do they. So you are legitimately both driving each other crazy because you're holding on to your perceptions of that other person and your fantasy of them rather than acknowledging the mental health elephant in the room. If you do indeed have a diagnosis and know about the mental health elephant in the room, if you're in a trauma bond, you will know soon. So yes, gaslighting, it happens on a massive scale, but it goes both ways in a trauma bonded relationship, and it does come down to a genuine misunderstanding, which can be further convoluted if someone is not diagnosed. You know, but when mental people are in their delusions, they don't always know their delusions. Otherwise, they wouldn't engage in them, because they certainly don't end up fun. And now, towards the end comes the devaluation stage. Slightly when things are going to get more crazy, more mean on both sides. And you get, you know, you kind of, your buzzwords like flying monkeys and future faking. It's two people who've been driving each other crazy, desperately trying not to lose each other because they're addicted to each other. It's going both ways in a trauma-bonded relationship. It is not in an abusive relationship. And in a trauma-bonded relationship, the mental illness and the neurodivergent versus neurotypical, or a different divergent, is what's causing all the problems. So, in the same way that addicts do disgrace themselves for drugs, that's what you will start doing to get your drug of choice, which is your partner who you can't admit is really bad for you and you need to break up with yet. And the thing is, when you start compromising whatever it is, your morals, you pretend to agree with them. You're desperate for them to calm down because you don't understand what's going on and you just want the happiness back and you're falling apart. You're also devaluing yourself. That's driving your mental health worse, whichever side you're on. And that is when future faking and lying and kicking cars and all that shit on both sides, both the neurotypical and the crazy people, happen. Right, so that's when it starts going up in flames. Right, the difference is, in a trauma bond, it's a fucking wrestling match. In an abusive relationship, you know, it's someone being beaten down. It's not two parties just going completely batshit crazy. And then you've got the discard, or the end of the relationship. Or the I sent you a text message and told you what a prick you'd been. Whatever it is, however it ended, you've got the discard. It could be the neurotypical partners chosen to Again, English just goes away sometimes, doesn't it? Especially when you're filming and you're 27 minutes in. There's no fucking way you're starting to record it again. Or the cluster Bs made the decision. It's that breakup. Right? Either shit's gone south and something really horrible has happened, or one of you's realised this is a toxic relationship, we need to go. The breakup happens. Right. The three ways that this can go with a cluster B trauma bonded relationship in comparison to an abusive relationship, right? Abusers will just keep abusing and abusing and going for it. In a cluster B relationship, probably neither side, unless they've got counselling, is perceiving themselves as the abuser. They both are. They're both the abusers, they're both the victims. It's a misunderstanding. They both need counselling and help. And because of the mindsets they both have, which led to it, yes, they both definitely need to recognise their part in it and get counselling, get help and understand their motivations and their role and where they went wrong to break the cycle of abuse. So, without further ado, the three ways this could go with a cluster B relationship. Right, it's not going to be just an abusive relationship. Someone keeps trying to abuse someone until someone ends up in prison, you know, and it's a terrified woman crying in a corner. It could just be the end. And their emotions will just switch off, which is going to seem very cold and callous. But the way that our minds work, if we've identified a problem and we've been in pain for a while and that's solved, it's going to go away. We grieved our relationship when we were in it and it was going shit towards the end. Because we don't have guilt, remorse, shame, regret. So we jump there. It's a self-defense mechanism. In that terms, it could go nicely. It could go very blissfully. But that's going to be a solid end of relationship. not likely to happen in an actually abusive relationship. You've then got this term hoovering, which is when mentally ill people and people in cluster B, trauma bonded relationships keep going back to each other. What middle-aged women call twin flames, right? I looked up twin flames and it's got it down to T. It is just romanticising a trauma bond down to even using the terms mirroring. And that is people still using each other. Personally, I can't. With the way that my brain works, as soon as I've identified a problem, that's it, boom, feelings gone. Some people do. It could be, your borderline is still doesn't know whether or not she's in love. There's genuine feelings behind it. Or it could be someone with NPD who either still believes they're in love with you and they want to be with you and they still want to feel good with you. Or, it could be a bitchy, you hurt me, I'm going to get you back. It happens with neurotypical women too. We're the more emotional species, we get away with it. Women scorned and all that. It does happen with men too, obviously. And then there is splitting. Now, if you are in a relationship with someone with cluster B and they are splitting on you, just get the fuck out. That is when it can get into dangerous abuse territory. With HPD, it's very unlikely to happen. With BPD, it's likely to happen quite often, but on a smaller level, because the way BPDs can have black and white thinking and they will split. For HPD, it needs to be, you need to do something extreme. Now, your BPD will probably love you again in 2 days, you'll be fine. Your HPD, your grandiose narcissist, know they're holding on to that grudge. It's not worth it. NPD again, it could come from someone with vulnerable narcissism. They're just begging to be back with the person they love. And it's very painful for them. It's not abuse on that part. Or it could be abusive, but it's coming from this place of real anger and hurt and shame and feeling wronged. It's a lot more complicated because they're being abusive, but perceiving themselves as the victim. And you're also perceiving yourself as the victim and the perpetrator, and you're both not understanding that you both have a mismatched, crazy, hellish relationship that needs to end. And thank you for listening to that. I hope that has given a few examples of how trauma bonding and abuse in relationships does differ. There is crossover, and there is also really significant factors that whichever side you are on affect the help that you can receive and breaking the cycle for future use. On a personal note, I couldn't be any more greatly thankful to Women's Aid for the counselling that I received through being in a trauma bonded relationship last year around the time of my diagnosis. They did tailor it to trauma bonded relationship. They were seeing it as, a mutually abusive, there is help in trauma bonded relationships, and honesty and finding out that, you've got a problem too, can be the absolute best thing in the world for your mental health. Take care of you, take care of your crazies, and I will see you again later. Thanks for listening.